Hey,
Hello.
how's it going?
It's fine.
I need to declutter my background. I've moved big piles off screen, but I keep accumulating more.
It's nice. I feel like I'm always like, what's that? Looking at it. I think the other day I was like, does that clock move? But it doesn't.
Well, no, I haven't changed the battery in it in a long time. But I do have my 1970 copy of Art in America.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Is that a Robert Indiana?
Yeah, it has a Paul Jenkins limited edition
Oh.
litho in it, and also has an article on Charles Close. So it's pretty
good
fun.
old Chuck.
But yeah, the main reason I got it is because it has it's the first major publication to feature William Golding. So anyway,
Did you just get that, or have you had that for a while?
I ordered it a couple of weeks ago on Amazon or something.
That's really cool. And also, yeah, what a trippy time capsule.
Yeah,
in the art world.
Definitely.
Okay, let me test this. I think it's that I just forget every time when I'm sharing my screen to click share computer sound. So share computer sound.
And here we go. 1, 2, 3. And we are live.
Hi, welcome to everyone who's logging on.
We'll give it a few minutes, allow folks to join the program.
Thank you for joining us tonight.
Welcome everyone. We've got a couple of minutes left before the program begins, so we're just waiting for everybody to join. Welcome everyone. We've got just a couple more minutes here before we begin the program tonight. Still have people joining, so we're going to give it a few more minutes here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for the opening lecture for Youthful Adventures, Growing Up in Photography. We'll be starting in just a few minutes, giving everyone a chance to log on.
Nice to see some of our docents and teachers and others joining us. Thank you all for being with us tonight, and give us just a few more minutes here and we'll get started.
Yes, I love seeing all these names I recognize. I wish we were in the auditorium right now so I could say hello.
We're going to give it just another minute or two here and we will get started. All right, we've got people still joining, but it is 6 o'clock now, so we will start here in just a moment. Still more coming in. While folks are joining us tonight, just a reminder that even though we're not having our opening in person here tonight, the exhibition does open physically in the Jepson Center tomorrow. So tomorrow you can come out and actually see the exhibition that we'll be covering tonight in our program. And we still have a lot of folks coming in here, so we'll give it just a second. And we are just a minute after 6 here. So I think we'll go ahead and get started. We've got some announcements and things to get through first while folks are joining the program. So we'll go ahead and start, and I'll just say welcome everyone to our opening lecture for the exhibition Youthful Adventures Growing Up in Photography. I'm Harry DeLorme, Senior Curator of Education, and we're really glad you all could be with us tonight, virtually at least. And we've got a really great presentation in store for you. It's a terrific exhibition. I saw it today, and I hope that you'll have a chance to see it very soon because it opens tomorrow. And hope you'll be inspired after the talk to come in and see these amazing images and the installation. It's a great show, and we'll be using selections from this exhibition and many of our virtual field trips for young people this fall. So we're really looking forward to using that in our upcoming educational programming. As we get started tonight's program, I wanted to make sure that I thank the Telfair Academy Guild, one of our wonderful member groups. They sponsor several lectures, key lectures for exhibition openings throughout the year. So I want to tag the Telfair Academy Guild for sponsoring tonight's program. I'd also like to thank the Deep Center, Savannah's Deep Center, which is of course renowned for its incredible writing program for young people in our community. And they have partnered with Telfair Museums on a Youthful Voices component of the Youthful Adventures exhibition. And Erin will be telling you a little bit more about that later in the program. Also, for those of you joining us tonight, we have some other programs coming up this fall, and I hope that you'll take the time to look into those and explore those programs that are coming up. We have on October 15th at 6 p.m. a virtual lecture opening for our Friends of African American Arts members group annual exhibition, and that will be a virtual opening featuring short talks by several of the participating artists. Also in October, we are launching a special virtual program. It's a series, a virtual book club in advance of our Legacy of Slavery Symposium, which is coming up in 2021. And it's a terrific series featuring discussions with many authors connected to the book readings, the book selections. That's been coordinated by Shannon Browning Mullis. So please look for that as well. If you look at upcoming events on telfair.org, you will find these programs. We also have a free weekend coming up at the Jepson Center beginning tomorrow and running through Sunday for everyone in Savannah, local residents to come by the Telfair, the Jepson Center site only. And we'll have free family packets for local families, children to pick up and enjoy at home afterwards. So I think now that we've got a fair number of people who have joined us for the program tonight, we're going to move on to tonight's program. I wanted to point out that if you have questions, we are going to have a Q&A after the main presentation tonight. So if you'd like to ask a question of Erin, please put your question in the chat, and we will answer those questions at the close of the presentation or just after Erin's presentation. So please think about questions that come up as you see the presentation and put your questions in the chat, and we will get to those later on. So again, thanks everyone for joining us, and I'm pleased to introduce Erin Dunn, who is Associate Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art here at Telfair Museums, where she previously was the Assistant Curator and Curatorial Fellow here beginning in 2014. Erin holds a BA from Emory University and an MA from the University of Georgia. She currently supports a very ambitious schedule of exhibitions, contemporary art exhibitions here at Telfair Museum's Jepson Center, organizing modern and contemporary exhibitions for the museum. She also oversees and guides development of Telfair's growing contemporary permanent collection. And one of her driving interests as a curator is the interpretation and communication of social and cultural issues addressed through the medium of photography, which you may have seen in many of her previous exhibitions, including the exhibition Watershed Contemporary Landscape Photography, which was a photographic survey exploring the increasingly fraught relationship between humankind and the environment, or The Language of Vision, Early 20th Century Photography, an examination of 4 photographers from Telfair's permanent collection, or the exhibition Mike Colster, Take Me to the River, a solo exhibition of contemporary wet plate ambrotypes from that artist's River series. Erin has also spearheaded a number of exhibitions for Telfair's Art 912 initiative, which seeks to promote the visibility of artists working right here in the Savannah community. She's got some major exhibition projects on her plate in the coming year or two, including in 2021, major exhibitions with contemporary artists Sonia Clark and Noel W. Anderson. And those are coming in the fall of 2021, as well as a retrospective of the photographer Bruce Davidson's work. So we're pleased to have Erin with us tonight to tell us about her most recent project and the one that opens to the public tomorrow, Youthful Adventures. So please welcome Erin Dunn. And Erin, we're glad to have you here, and take it away.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Harry. I really appreciate everyone being here tonight. I know it's a different format and I wish we could be there in person, but I think it's wonderful that we have this opportunity to share the exhibition virtually. I'm going to share my screen. I also have a few thank yous before I jump into the lecture. I quickly also want to thank the Telfair Academy Guild for sponsoring this lecture, as well as to take this opportunity to thank my colleagues at Telfair Museums. Putting together an exhibition is always a team effort. And this year was complicated by some unknowns and push timelines, but I'm always in awe of this group of people and their ability to put together an exhibition and have something amazing to share with our audiences. So I want to thank Creative Director Melissa Hill for the graphic design of this exhibition, Communications Manager Bree Sally, the Education Department, especially Amari Williams-Alford for her contributions, and Harry DeLorme for assisting with the programming. Finally, I want to thank the Curatorial Department, including Assistant Curator Anselin Bayan, and the exhibition team, Jessica Estes, Heath Rich, and Malutin Pavlovic for installation. I also want to thank some artists who loaned their work for this exhibition, including Eva O'Leary, Shauna Frischgorn, and Eva Vierbeck, as well as the Do Good Fund, which is a photography collection based in Columbus, Georgia. And they loaned several works from their really incredible photography collection that's focused on photographs about the South. Youthful Adventures Growing Up in Photography celebrates the diversity of childhood experiences as depicted in photographs from the mid-20th century to the present day. This exhibition features 46 photographs by 25 photographers, and it will be on view at Telfair Museum's Jepson Center in the Levitt and Varnado galleries through April 18th of next year. In many ways, this exhibition is a celebration of Telfair Museum's permanent collection. The photography collection began in earnest in 1996 and since then has grown exponentially. Two major strengths of the collection include the holdings of the street photographers Helen Levitt and Bruce Davidson, and you'll see many of their photographs in this exhibition. And as Harry mentioned, I hope that you will all be able to make it to the museum soon to see these works in person. So what was your childhood like? If you are anything like me, your childhood memories are probably a combination of what you truly remember, what you've been told, and what you've pieced together through snapshots of yourself. You may not remember the day or event or time, but you probably have a picture that tells you that it happened that way. That I did climb that jungle gym at elementary school, that I made fast friends with the neighborhood cat, and that I practiced ballet class on the front porch of the home that I lived in for the first decade of my life. The photos that we have can store that information of what, where, and when. And because it's a stage of life that all adults have undergone and many observe with their own children and grandchildren, pictures of childhood are often viewed through the very powerful lens of memory and nostalgia. Photography is uniquely suited to capturing these slice of life moments that help formulate the complicated yet compelling narrative of growing up. Now, as you may have guessed, my own childhood photographs are not included in this exhibition, but I hope that they encourage you to think about the role photography has played in your childhood and memories. Before delving into the role of photography and the depiction of childhood, I briefly wanted to explore some common conceptions of childhood visually through Western art history. Before the 17th century, probably the most common depiction of childhood was through the infant Jesus. And his depiction did not necessarily put forward a treatise on childhood, but rather was meant to inspire pious devotion. 16th and 17th century depictions of children often looked at them through the lens of miniature adults or as foils for human behavior. So Dutch genre scenes often included children as representative of the follies of adult behavior. Or in other depictions, like this one of the portrait of the girl aged 1, they were commissioned by families to demonstrate their wealth and to have a commemoration of their child. So as you can see, this girl is proportioned as if a small adult and adorned in adult clothing with the symbols of wealth from her family in her hands. And it really wasn't until the Enlightenment in the 18th century and treatises written by such philosophers as Jean-Jacques Rousseau that gave rise to the notion that children were not faulty small adults, but rather autonomous beings worthy of nurturing for their own sake. So this begins the concept of what art historian Anne Higonnet has termed the romantic age of childhood. And that emphasized the innocence of children that kept in line with the evolving value and morality of the age. The kind of paradigm example of this would be an image by an artist like Sir Joshua Reynolds and his painting, The Age of Innocence, where he's exploring childhood as a very innocent time separated from adulthood. And here you have a very young, rosy-cheeked girl sitting in a romanticized landscape with soft curls framing her face and her hands clutched to her heart that kind of portray this very sweet image of childhood. And kind of post-Enlightenment period, you start to see more and more depictions of childhood in art, and that becomes ever more evident in works by artists such as the Impressionists, who are taking everyday life as their inspiration. So children are depicted as they would be in reality, you know, playing, sleeping, taking baths. And so it really becomes more part of the visual culture in the 19th and 20th century. The ideas of childhood did not necessarily change with the invention of photography in the mid-19th century. Photographs of children tended to reinforce the standards of the Victorian age, where the virtuousness of children was emphasized. And this is evident in a work by an artist such as Julia Margaret Cameron, who was still interested in using photography as an artistic medium and looking to painting and subject matters that might be depicted in painting and then reinventing them using this new process. So she took a photograph of her niece, Rachel Gurney, and posed her as if she was a cherub or a putti, very similar to the ones in Raphael's Sistine Madonna, which is referenced at the bottom of the image. And she posed her on a pedestal and put swan wings on her back and kind of blurred the image so it has more of an artistic flair to it. But I think the difference is that you know you're not looking at an angel or a cherub. You know you're looking at a small child whose aunt has posed her in this kind of uncomfortable pose. So you get the sense that she is kind of wistful and anxious, and you see that on her face. Photography continues to depict innocence even up to the present day, or near present day, and that's especially evident as well through advertisements that feature children, as well as the work of artists such as Anne Gades, who really rely on the innocence and cuteness of childhood as her subject matter. And she's mostly looking at the idea of newborns as kind of a blank slate who haven't been, affected by the world as of yet. But of course, many of us think of photography as that element that allows us to show reality, that you can't hide what's in front of you when you take a photograph of it. And that's evidenced through work by a photographer such as Lewis Hine, who's a social documentarian, and taking his camera out to show that the innocence of childhood is not always necessarily true when children are being exploited in factories and industries and engaging in adult behavior, such as these young newsboys smoking on the sidewalk. And so he's really using his camera as a tool for social reform and happened to get through a lot more of like child labor laws through his work. And then of course, many of you have probably heard of the artist Sally Mann. She was really popularized through a series she did about her own children, and that was a series called Immediate Family. And she received a lot of criticism because many people thought that she was exploiting her children through these photographs, although she has always insisted they were very much a collaborative part of making these works, and that she felt that, you know, to reward them for this collaboration, she had to make the best, most beautiful photographs she could. But when she kind of faced this volley of criticism, you know, she wrote most recently in her memoir, Hold Still, that, quote, "These are not children with ice in their veins. These are not my children at all. These are children in a photograph." So she's really kind of reminding the viewer that this is a staged, posed moment that doesn't necessarily reflect what was happening in their day-to-day experiences, but rather a vision that she was trying to portray through her work. And so that kind of reminds the viewer that these are moments in time that are removed from their larger context and filtered through the vision of the photographer, and also layered with the meanings that are brought to it by the viewer. These works encourage us to think of the notions of childhood as it's represented in visual culture and how it corresponds to our own ideas of time and place. Childhood as an ideal has always been changing and corresponds to the moments and values of the time. I would like to share with you a few installation photographs from the exhibition. These works in the front gallery are largely black and white images from the 1940s through the 1980s. And the back gallery features mostly color photography from the 1990s through the present day. These photographs don't seek to make a universal claim about childhood, but show what a necessarily complicated stage of life it is. They capture a range of emotions, from playful discovery of childhood to the probing and sometimes awkward search for identity that is an essential part of young adulthood. And they reveal the broad and changing community influences across the United States from the 1940s through today. Another aspect of this exhibition is also starting to question photography in the digital age, and how that's given rise to a generation of children whose self-awareness is often born out of seeing their own images, and for whom photography is portable, personal, and yet a highly public form of self-expression. In this exhibition, I don't necessarily spell out themes for the viewer to find, but the works themselves are put into conversation with each other so that you can find those moments of shared connection and experiences and start to formulate those ideas. There were several common threads throughout the exhibition as I was pulling the works together. So I'm going to share some of those ideas with you that I hope will enhance your experience of the exhibition when you see it in person. One really common and prevalent theme was the idea of activism. I often think about how change falls upon the shoulders of young people who are fighting for their future. Children often have the strongest voice for change as they're invested in the world that they will grow up in and inherit. And looking towards many images that are from the civil rights era, and even thinking about the present day and how young people have a role in protest. On the slide, I include a few of the photographers who I would put as kind of exploring these themes in the exhibition. I'm really pleased to have two photographs by the artist Gordon Parks in the exhibition. These works are from the Do Good Fund and from a series that he did where he was commissioned by Life magazine to detail the day-to-day experience of African-American life under the systemic Jim Crow segregation in the South. And that was featured in an essay titled "The Restraints, Open and Hidden" in Life magazine. And for the series, he followed one family, the Thornton family in Mobile, Alabama. And there are so many things I could point out about this image, but I think what always draws me in and is most compelling to me is that it's in color. In 1956, when color photography was not often used in the fine art world. And he, was really showing the immediacy of their day-to-day life, but it's also a reminder to viewers today that this was not something that happened in the far distant past, but was really kind of a recent way of living for many people. And this image shows Joanne Thornton Wilson with her niece, and they're standing under this colored entrance sign at the Mobile Sanger Theater in Mobile. And although she lived in a world that treated her as a second-class citizen, Wilson stands tall and poised, and her niece's presence offers a hopeful alternative future to their unjust present. And I've kind of compared this with an image by Bruce Davidson from his Time of Change series. And this, he received a Guggenheim Fellowship in 1961 to document youth in America. And he was really inspired and moved by the courage of the freedom riders and the nonviolent protests and marches. So he spent several years documenting those marches. And I think this image is just really compelling in that this sea of people, this young man stands tall and he stands out with his, really determined gaze and pose. You'll probably notice that American flag symbols and imagery are really prevalent in many of these images. And I think that's because it's part of these young people's beginnings of questioning, what does it mean to be an American? And that's certainly a question that the artist Sheila Priebright was asking in her series, Young Americans, where she was photographing Generation Z and millennials posing with an American flag in the years leading up to the 2008 election. So she asked Andre Kerr to pose himself as he would see fit. And he decided on this pose with the flag kind of draped around his shoulders, holding his skateboard. And he wrote a statement to go along with it, which I'll read to you now. Quote, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, that I may be the greatest nation on earth, with equality for all, regardless of color or race. United, strong, free, and great. I am an artist. I am a musician. I am a skater. I am young, wild, and carefree. I am a Black man. I am America." And I think this echoes the photograph that you see on the right by Davidson, where this young man is unapologetic in his fight for his civil rights. And this was taken at the Selma March in 1965 and is also part of that Time of Change series that the other photograph was included in. So this was a little bit what Harry touched on earlier, was this really wonderful community engagement component that we have as part of this exhibition. So I really want to thank the Education Department and Amari for creating a partnership with DEEP that allowed us to feature youthful voices as part of this exhibition. So this was a showcase that engaged students from fourth graders to young adults to respond to selected works in the exhibition. So those young artists responded to those works through creative responses like poetry or short descriptions. And we feature those in a few different ways in the exhibition. So outside the gallery, you'll see a TV screen with the writing juxtaposed with the image. And then inside the gallery, next to the works that they respond to, you'll find QR codes that you can access with your phone to listen to them reading their responses. So I just want to thank Liam Clark, Maria Rush George, Jayla J. Bird Lawton, Samuel Poole, and Osset Seti Lee for participating in this. I think it really adds such a wonderful component to this exhibition. So I wanted to share with you one of those responses. This is a poem titled "The Atom." by Jaybird, who's responding to a photograph by Frederick Baldwin of Benjamin Van Clark leading a march on Bull Street. And this was taken in 1963 in the middle of civil rights marches in Savannah. And Benjamin Van Clark was very much a leader in the marches at the time. And he was 19 years old, and he was leading these protesters from Bull Street down to Wright Square. And I would just like to share with you Jaybird's interpretation. I'm gonna try to play this recording. The recording is a little soft on Zoom, so if you turn up the volume on your computer, I hope you'll be able to hear it more clearly. Otherwise, please just read along and I'll give you a few moments to do that.
It began with an atom, another minority with power in numbers. A leader was born with burning heat and tranquil flame. He would become the atom smasher, the town's fool after facing such blows. He would gather thousands to join this voyage, with voices sentenced to white noise, eyes heavily armed, and this doesn't surprise me anymore. A war was clear. It took 6 months of marching together, proudly, peacefully, to break bread at the same table, a taste for what was to come.
So I hope you were all able to hear that, but if not, you could read along and sense what powerful words that she had in response to this image. Another aspect that's really common in many of the works that you'll see in the exhibition is the idea of play and the idea of imagination and creativity, which is such a necessary part of every child's life that helps fulfill and support them through emotional, intellectual, and physical development. And I think no matter your circumstances, imagination and play are such an important part of childhood. And I think it's something that as adults, we kind of look back and wish that we could recapture what seems so easy and comes so easily to children. Helen Levitt is a photographer who's really amazing at capturing these candid moments of children at play. Using her handheld Leica camera, she would explore the streets of New York in the 1940s. And she said that she always went out on Halloween because children were always out on Halloween and having an amazing time. And so she was able to capture them kind of in their element. And so this depiction is probably one of her most famous photographs. And it shows these 3 children who are in a group together on this brownstone in New York, but each kind of living their own individual experience as they look forward to what's to come, but that she was able to distill it down into this really wonderful moment. That juxtaposes with Keith Carter's image of these 3 young children also on Halloween, titled Chicken Feathers from 1975. And Keith Carter is a photographer based in Texas. And he saw these children one drizzly Halloween night, and they were posing with sparklers, which created this kind of haze around their faces. And you can see beneath their feet the chicken feathers that are referenced in the title. And it really just created this kind of extraordinary photograph that I think touches on the magical quality of childhood experience. Here are 2 more images looking at play, and again, that idea that kind of play will always come through no matter your circumstances, and imagining creativity can get you beyond those circumstances. So we have a photograph on the left, again by Helen Levitt, and this is a photograph she took in Spanish Harlem. And a really incredible image with so much going on that you could, spend hours analyzing. But I love, one, that it's a frame within a frame. So you see this mirror that's broken, and you see this child on a tricycle who's kind of framed by that. And then, of course, in the photograph is another frame where you see all the activity that's happening on the sidewalk, all this busyness. But these children are very much kind of in this group together, concentrated on the activity that they've chosen, and enjoying themselves. And then the photograph on the right is from a series by Bruce Davidson called the East 100th Street series. And this was a series where he was focusing on some tenement houses in Harlem and really spending time, several years, actually going to these houses to kind of show the poverty that people were living in, to hopefully enact some change and help for them. He wanted to make sure he spent a long time with them and really produced empathetic portraits of the people that were living there. He said it was important for him to meet his subjects face to face. So he used a large format camera, which is, much kind of larger and would call a lot of attention to him, and really kind of created a collaboration between him and the subject matter. And in most of these images, the subjects are looking at the camera and they are looking at Davidson. And in that, they're also looking at us as the viewer. And so this image of this young child kind of playing in the alley and climbing the wires that are on the side of the building, I think, again, speaks to that idea of just, I think he was probably looking at Davidson and saying, look at me, look what I can do, and kind of exploring his environment and showing what he could do. This is also just a really fun image by the photographer Bill Yates. When he was 26, he was finishing his thesis at the University of South Florida, and he was looking for a subject matter to photograph. And driving around on the outskirts of Tampa, he found this roller skating rink called the Sweetheart Roller Skating Rink. And it was dead when he went, but the owner was there, and he said, come back tonight and it'll be a really great time. So he came back and it was full of all this kind of youthful energy and rebellion. And so he came back every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night for the next 7 months and took some really incredible images. And it was kind of this time where some of the more liberal mindsets and clothing and ideas were coming out of California and New York and making their way down to the South, down to the outskirts of Tampa. But this particular image is just, a kind of funny image of this little boy who's drinking a soda, which might look like an alcoholic beverage from far away. And he's standing in the midst of this group who's, giving him room to kind of perform as himself, as kind of the clown in the middle. And there's just some really, I think, humorous images in the exhibition. I hope that you'll find those moments of fun and play and humor throughout the exhibition as well. Community is a really important element that's featured in the exhibition as well. The idea that we start to formulate ourselves and our identities, not just through what we learn, but through what others teach us, and through our families and friends and those organizations that help make us who we are. That sense of family and fellowship is really evident in works by photographers such as Larry Fink and Keith Cardwell. Larry Fink's photograph is from a series he did called Social Graces. And it's really kind of a two-part series. For the first part, he was taking photographs of New York City social scenes, so going to places like Studio 54 and disco clubs and showing this glittering society. But he also, at the same time, was moving to rural upstate Pennsylvania and really became part of this family's life while he was there, the Sabatines, who invited him for birthday parties and graduations. And it really became a treatise almost on kind of that glittering yet very vacuous society that he found in New York, versus this really warm, inviting family life that he participated in Pennsylvania. And so I think this is just a really gleeful, joyful image of these young girls enjoying a birthday party. And you kind of see the wrapped presents and spilled juice and just the joy on their faces. The image on the right is by the British photographer Keith Cardwell. And this is from a series he did in Savannah called The First African Baptist Church. And so he's taking photographs at that church, which is still in existence and holds services to this day. And I just love this image of these little girls, possibly sharing a secret or telling something during the middle of a service, and kind of fostering that sense of togetherness and the idea that, what they were saying at the time probably seemed so important to them, but it's kind of lost to the time, but we can still kind of participate in that moment through this photograph. Another photographer I'm really excited to share with you is the Chinese-American photographer Baldwin Lee. He studied photography at MIT and Yale and accepted a position as professor of photography at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville in 1981, where he worked very recently until his retirement. And when he started that role, he wanted to explore the new region that he was living in. So he set out on road trips down back roads in Tennessee and Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana. And during those trips, he really amassed kind of a wonderful grouping of empathetic portraits of Americans kind of struggling under poverty. And instead of, I think what's really wonderful about this series is that instead of concealing himself behind the wheel of a car, he would hoist his 4x5-inch camera, so his very large format camera, across his shoulder and walk around. And he wrote that, quote, "Walking is by far the most useful way to increase your chances of encountering interesting people and situations." And, you know, he acknowledged that he cut an odd figure as an Asian American in the 1980s wandering around back roads in the South, but that he met really incredible and interesting people and kind of was able to become into their lives that way. This is a photograph by the contemporary artist Peyton Fulford. This is from her Infinite Tenderness series, where Fulford was really exploring her desire to connect with individuals in the queer community in the South. She grew up in a religious family in Albany, Georgia, and never felt comfortable proclaiming her identity, but she admired and found strength in individuals who were able to express that freely and openly. So using her camera, she was able to meet those people and start to become part of the queer community in the South. And it really, you know, kind of opened her eyes to the limitless possibilities of who we can become when you're surrounded by people who love and care about that part of you. I think performativity and performance is another really important part of childhood, and one that's certainly evident in many photographs in this exhibition. So the idea of kind of performing a social or cultural role, testing things out, trying sports that your parents want you to try, performing roles that others insist on. But it's also really important to kind of finding out what you like and what you don't like, learning about hard work, learning about fairness, and generosity within those elements of life. So I have two images, really wonderful images here. On the left is a photograph by the artist Frank Stewart. Some of you might recognize his name. He's been the photographer for the Savannah Music Festival for the past 16 years. So that's how he became really familiar with Savannah. And he took this photograph on one St. Patrick's Day as the Jenkins High School Marching Band was preparing to perform. I heard there might be some Jenkins High School students watching this, so if there are, I wanted to give a shout out, Go Warriors. These are the Marching Warriors, and I love the title of this photograph, which is called Circle in the Square, Savannah. So of course, Stewart's thinking about the shape of the photograph, thinking of the circular tuba within that rectangle/square, but also thinking about you know, the tuba and the performance within a literal square in the city of Savannah, which is something that's so particular to the city. And I think it's just a really beautiful image of this kind of moment of community and pride. And then on the right, we have an image by the photographer Jerry Siegel. And this is titled Game Time, and he took it in Selma, Alabama, where he often takes many of his photographs. That's where he grew up, and he's kind of trying to tell a particular story about the region. This image is just kind of, I think, really wonderful. I love the viewpoint of the camera, which kind of places you on the field with the players as they march forward towards you, very purposely forward, but it's also one of those images that kind of highlights their youth as they wear these oversized bright yellow jerseys and helmets that look a little too big for their heads. And so you kind of think about how they're beginning to formulate who they are and what they want to do. Again, I hope this is one of those images that might make you chuckle a little bit, find a moment of humor within the exhibition. This is a work by the photographer Erin Dunn, who was photographing these young beauty pageant contestants who were participating in the Soldiers Reunion Parade in Catawba County, North Carolina. And that happens each year to honor war veterans and celebrate American patriotism. So you can see them as they're in that moment of waiting to perform, and that idea of kind of facing your impatience and boredom before that element of performance and performativity. So I think, you know, each girl has a different expression that maybe we can relate to within the image if you've ever had those moments. Love is another common theme in many of the works in the exhibition. The idea of finding connections with others beyond maybe necessarily family and friends, and that community idea that I talked about earlier. The Photograph by Larry Fink. This is another one from the Social Graces series. And he captured this young couple at a local fair, and the boy's face is kind of hidden against the girl's face, which is highlighted in this really beautiful way by the light. And you kind of see that excitement and first kind of blush of love on her face. And then kind of juxtaposed with an image on the right, which is much more posed and less candid. This is an image by the photographer Jill Frank, who uses a large format camera, and that requires the subjects to hold their pose for at least a minute while she takes the exposure. So I'm sure that was kind of an interesting moment where they chose this pose and then realized they had to hold it. She wrote that, quote, "People get tired of standing and holding a pose. A cool thing happens when they get frustrated. The slower you go, good things happen." So this idea that maybe we reveal more of ourselves in those moments of kind of frustration and having to slow down and take things slowly. She, in her work, often kind of talks about how external presentation is often complicated by our own internal self-awareness. So maybe what they wanted to show wasn't necessarily what kind of came out in the image. There's also this idea of kind of the rebelliousness of youth, and these images really kind of counteract those ideas of the earlier conceptions of the innocence of childhood, which is so kind of perpetuated through society, looking at kind of the transgressiveness of youth. Larry Clark is very well known for a series he did entitled Tulsa, and that was looking at kind of the hedonistic lifestyle amongst his friends in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and also kind of contradicting the idea that, you know, kids out in the suburbs weren't also engaging in, you know, kind of promiscuous behavior that the kids in the cities might have been doing. But he was, this image is not from that particular series, but it shows this kind of young man looking directly at the camera, kind of leaning towards the camera. And it was taken just a few years before Clark's coming of age film Kids in 1995. And that really kind of shocked audiences with its frank portrayal of teenage sexuality and drug use. And then Davidson's photograph from 1959 is from his series called The Brooklyn Gang. And that was a series he did when he read about this group in a newspaper, and they called themselves the Jokers, kind of just an article detailing their misdeeds out in Brooklyn. And Davidson was about 25 at the time, and so he was still looked young enough to kind of fit in with this group. And he hung out with them and took photographs and kind of became involved in their lives and took really kind of empathetic portraits and kind of showed how, you know, they kind of did what they wanted. They went out to Coney Island, they left the city, they played baseball in the streets, and they weren't under the watchful eye of their parents, and that they were kind of just living their lives carefree. And this image is very pervasive and kind of pop culture. Some people recognize it as the cover of Bob Dylan's album, Together Through Life. And I think it's, you know, this idea of this young couple in a car full of people, but they're really just kind of engaged in each other as if no one else is around. One kind of final idea I want to talk about through the photographs is this idea of self-awareness and returning to the concept of kind of the proliferation of images in the digital age, and how kind of sharing ourselves through social media has really kind of made photography at the forefront of ideas of identity and who we are. The idea of kind of how many is too many photographs. And I think that's something that we're still figuring out and we don't necessarily have an answer to at this moment. But looking to who are we outside of that image that we put forward in a photograph. That's explored through the work of Irish-American photographer Eva O'Leary, and I feature a video of hers in the exhibition. And she's kind of exploring how we modulate our appearance and how we change it based on knowing that we're being looked at. So in this video, it's showing girls between the ages of 11 and 14, and they were asked by Eva to pose in front of a two-way mirror while she photographed and filmed them. So they knew she was behind the mirror, but they couldn't see her. They were looking at themselves. So you can see them kind of in this act of self-awareness and fixing their hair and looking. Each one kind of responds differently to that moment. But I think it's, you know, kind of how do you present yourself in a world that's filled with images that tell you what you're supposed to look like, and how these young girls are kind of figuring that out through this work. Another photographer who's kind of looking at that same theme, but in a different vein, is the artist Eva Veerbeek. She's Belgian, but she does occasionally work in Savannah. And so this was a series that she did called America's Girls, where she was photographing girls between the ages of 6 and 16 to express themselves without judgment in front of the camera. And she used a large format camera as well and hoped to create a honest and judgment-free environment where it was more of a collaboration between herself and the subject. And she said it was helpful that her camera, she can't offer immediate feedback. She can't turn the camera around to them and say, this is what I took, because she has to go and print out the photograph in a dark room. So the girls that she photographs, although they can still, you know, appear self-conscious, they're surrounded. She wanted them to wear or pose with props of things that they were passionate about. So the young girl on the left is at the Kiwanis Ogeechee Fair. And so she's kind of proudly wearing that large belt buckle to show that she's part of the fair every year. And again, the girl on the right, shout out to Jenkins again, is part of the Jenkins marching band. And so this kind of like up close image shows her pride in that position. So I wanted to end the presentation with this quote by the artist Cynthia Hennebree, who wrote, "I've been thinking so much about growing up, how to do it well, and what happens when the parts of us that aren't meant to grow up don't. How the eternal children that live within us pass things on to the children we are in charge of helping to grow up now. Grief, joy, fear, isolation, anger, abandonment, pride. I marvel at this every single day." So I hope this exhibition helps create conversations between these photographs of youths in America in the 20th and 21st century. And those exchanges traverse time and place. And I hope they also encourage you as a viewer to embrace your own inner child. And thank you so much for listening to this presentation. I'm so excited for you to see the exhibition in person. I wasn't able to speak to every image that's in there, so there are a lot more to explore and learn about. So now I'll kind of stop sharing my screen and see if there are any questions. I'd be happy to take them at this time. So Anselin asked about the Gordon Parks images, saying they were more powerful because of the color, and wondering if I have any more thoughts about black and white versus color photography in this exhibition. I think, I mean, it becomes such a stark contrast when you do see those Parks images juxtaposed with the black and white photography, which almost, yeah, kind of puts you at a distance from the subject matters as if it's happening in another era. And I think the color photography in the back really places us in the contemporary moment. And so it makes you wonder, I guess, a little bit, you know, how if artists had embraced color photography as fine art photography in the mid 20th century, if we would look at images in a different way. So I'm not sure that's a complete thought, but I'll think more on it. That's a really interesting point. Thank you everyone for joining us.
Erin, something else, another question or another point I think you made earlier. A number of the images are Southern images. There's like a really preponderance of those. So maybe you could speak to that just for a moment.
Yeah, that's true. I think, I mean, on the one hand, that is just, as I mentioned earlier, kind of a celebration of our permanent collection. And that tends to be where our permanent collection is strongest, is in Southeast photography. And then, of course, I loaned had several photographs loaned from the Do Good Fund, which again focuses on Southern photography. And I have to admit kind of a preference to images that reflect the region that we live in and, you know, ideas that are more kind of prevalent in our area. But I hope there are several images kind of that traverse, you know, place across the US. So I tried not to limit it too much to the Southeast. So you'll see kind of rodeos of Montana or alleys in New York and upstate Pennsylvania. But it is a lot of Southern photography for sure.
Great. Any other questions? Let's see. We have one that just came in from Catherine. When did Telfair begin to make collecting photography one of its focuses?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question, Catherine. It really was, I think around 1996 was when the collection, which may seem late to a lot of people. I think, you know, photography is kind of one of those underdogs trying to, you know, put it back on the pedestal. Now it seems so ubiquitous in our life, you know, in our pockets, online, on Instagram. We look at photos all the time. But really in kind of the fine art world, institutions didn't collect it till much later. Obviously painting and sculpture and those kind of mediums were preferred. So 1996 is when we started collecting. And as I mentioned, it's really grown exponentially. Helen Levitt is kind of one of those like founding collections, and the artist herself donated many works. And then most recently in 2018, we received a donation of 300 Bruce Davidson photographs. So that's been a real boon to the collection. And you'll see many of his images as I showed in the PowerPoint in the exhibition.
Let's see, and a question from Carrie. Were all of these artists trained professionally in photography?
I don't know, Carrie. I'll have to go through the list of 25 and think through. I think, trying to think of someone who wasn't. I mean, Bill Yates is an example of a photographer who did it, you know, for his thesis project in college. He thought he wanted to be a photographer, so that's why he made that series, but then he never took photographs after that. And it wasn't until he was, you know, had another career and much later in life that he was going through essentially boxes in his attic and found this collection of images and submitted a portfolio for a competition. And people were like, you have a treasure trove. These are amazing. So certainly there are artists who didn't pursue it to the fullest degree.
Yeah, I think it probably, you know, increased through the 20th century as photography became more recognized as a fine art form, and you have, you know, university programs emerging that, you know, actually
cater to it.
Photography, but prior to that, maybe not so much. Great question. And any other questions? Any other comments or questions? You can place them in the chat. One from Callie. What is okay? A couple more here coming in. What is Telfair looking for in terms of adding to the photography collection?
We're always interested in adding to the photography collection. I think, again, one of our most recent acquisitions was, it was called the Southern Icons Portfolio. So that was artists looking at, again, the Southeast and their kind of vision of it, a more contemporary vision. I think I would be interested in expanding the photography collection more to the present day. A lot of our images are kind of mid-20th, late 20th century. And I think there's some really amazing photography that's happening right now that could enhance the collection in amazing ways.
There was another one from Anne Selene there. So if you see that, Erin.
Yeah, Anne Selene is asking about the thesis that I wrote for my grad school project, which was on the Dutch artist Reneke Dijkstra, and she's included in one photograph in the exhibition. And that's a kind of a fun image because she took this series of beach portraits. Again, that idea that filtered through some of those images of people having to pose themselves for a long time in front of a large format camera, and you really become kind of self-conscious and self-aware of yourself while you're doing that, and you don't get that immediate feedback of seeing what you looked like. So that photograph was taken on Hilton Head, and Reneke Dijkstra took several photographs on Hilton Head in the early 90s. And then she also took several photographs of Eastern Europe beaches. So that's always kind of an interesting juxtaposition of images. Again, just speaking to the idea of kind of vulnerability in photography.
Terrific. All right. Any more questions? We're coming close to the 7 o'clock hour here, so we might have time for one from Bridget just came in.
That's a good question, Bridget. It's a lot to pack in there. She's asking, how do you approach curating an exhibition like this? Are you thinking about different themes first and then find photos that fit into those themes? Or were there photographs you knew you wanted in and themes built around those initial photographs? I think it would be the second part. Again, that focus on Telfair Museum's permanent collection. I think so often we hear about how people want to see what we have in our collection. And so it's one of those things where you pick up on something and then you notice it all the time. So I started to notice that we had really incredible images of children, and that kind of prodded me to think about, why is childhood such a compelling subject matter for photographers, and who else is exploring this idea? And of course we had the Helen Levitt images, and children were her main subject matter. And then we got the Bruce Davidson images, and he's often looking at children, and his Brooklyn Gang series is often spoken about in that way, of kind of becoming part of this group of youth's lives. And so then I started to kind of formulate the themes out from there.
And we have one more question from Isis. This is, what makes a photograph captivating? The type of camera you use, composition, lighting. Do you find it more difficult to critique a photograph? And do you find it more difficult to critique a photograph versus a painting or sculpture?
I would throw that back on you, Isis. I think that it's up to the viewer to kind of look at the photograph and take out of it what they can. I, of course, have probably preferences towards particular photographers and their styles, and maybe the way that they compose an image is more compelling. But in many ways, art is very subjective, and what might be interesting to me may not necessarily be interesting to you. But, in an exhibition like this where you have 46 photographs, I'm sure there are several that will speak to you in a different way and be exciting for you.
Well, we are at the 7 o'clock hour. So I want to thank everyone again for joining us tonight. I also wanted to thank our exhibition supporters. In addition to TAG, who sponsored the lecture tonight, we'd like to thank all of those who supported the exhibition, including the City of Savannah, who provided investment for that program, the Georgia Council for the Arts, the Terra Foundation for American Art, and Mrs. Robert O. Levitt. So thank you all. Thanks everyone for attending tonight. This lecture will be available later on Telfair's YouTube channel, where you can find our lectures in connection with our exhibitions, virtual tours, and the like. And please stay tuned for other programs. If you're a Telfair member, make sure you check your e-newsletter, the Telfair magazine, and other sources to see other programs that are coming up. We have more coming your way in October with our virtual book club, with our Friends of African American Arts opening. And then we're hoping to announce very soon a very special lecture for November, contemporary photographer in conjunction with this exhibition. So please stay tuned for all of that. Thank you all for joining us and have a great night.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone. Thanks again.
Bye.